Hi all, it was really nice seeing you in class. I hope that you found it to be useful and, generative of thoughts and ideas about ways to be a little bit more present and grounded and centered, ways of bringing that into our lives personally and professionally, and also, being good to yourself along the journey. Now, I thought I would take a few moments and talk about some of the things that are lined up for between now and next week, so that you have a little bit more clarity if you left class and it wasn't as clear as it could be, or if I didn't have as much time as I would have liked to have shared it with you. So first of all, readings. The topic is listening. There's not a whole lot of readings. There's 4 readings. I think that you'll find them to be interesting. They will reinforce each other. So please read them slowly if you can. Maybe read one of them or 2 of them a couple of times to really soak it in, because when we are referring to mindful listening and we're applying a lot of what it is that we've been learning all semester, it's really packed into these readings. And relatedly, one of the practice assignments for this week is the practice to do not interrupt. This is one that Paul Singerman likes to share with people, and it's one that we'll talk about with him. So as a reminder, the instruction is spend one day this week with the intention to not interrupt anybody, letting them finish what they're saying before you say whatever you're going to say, if you're going to say anything. And the practice is to have that intention and to observe what arises. So just like when we put our cell phone off to the side while we were driving, the instruction was to put your cell phone off to the side with the intention not to reach for it while you're driving, and then to observe the impulse, for example, to do so. This practice is very similar. Maybe you'll reach for the phone, maybe you'll interrupt. That's really secondary to noticing what's arising along the way, leading up to the interruption or leading up to the reaching for the phone. In class, we talked about the spiral, and oftentimes you'll be able to have a ability to connect the desire to interrupt with the fact that there's a little spiral going on. So hopefully this week will also be an opportunity to connect the dots to some of what we explored today in relationship to some of the things that we've been exploring. In your handout, you'll find that you have one page, which is a spiral. And so it's your opportunity to take some event that takes place this week, one that sort of looms a little bit more larger in terms of it being like a snow globe moment, and to be able to note and track your observations of that spiral. That both can be very helpful as a practice unto itself. You might also find that it is somewhat steadying just to go through that exercise. In some ways, it invites us to look at the landscape of the mind. And you may remember that to name is to tame, to identify where you are, anger, regret, frustration, and the weeds. In some ways, that awareness changes how caught we are in the experience. So I hope that you find the do not interrupt practice to be a useful one. While you have one day where you're to really make it the one-day endeavor, bring it into any of your conversations and see what it's like to have that intention to not interrupt. All right, in addition to the readings, in addition to the do not interrupt practice and making note of a spiral, we also have it where you will be doing your daily practices. And here, this isn't so different than what it's always been, except that you get to pick and choose what your practice is, but we're doing it as a sandwich practice to see how it is that we can integrate a little bit of what we've been talking about and just beginning to read about in terms of solitude and self-care, have it be a part of the day's practice. And then when we continue our conversation of solitude next week, and we bring into it a little bit of what you've been practicing and observing and noticing from your practice, these pieces will continue to sort of move closer together. So just a brief recap of this practice. In class, you wrote down for tomorrow the 3 different things that you'll do, unless you change your mind on them and make it something different. You put the length of time. The length of time would add up to 20. They could be as little as 1 minute, as much as 18 minutes, but you can modify those in any way that you would like, as long as the middle one is the longer practice. The idea is that on either side, you do something that really is in the realm of self-care, a way of having a little bit more solitude. If you think about any of the things that you all came up with on the kinds of things that you might do for self-care, you'll notice that they have a pretty high solitude meter reading associated with them. So whether it's listening to music, whether it's, doing some breathing exercises, whether it's, journaling, whether it's prayer, whether it's, gratitude practice, it doesn't really matter what, being with your dog, petting your dog. You've got the beginning, you've got the ending, and you've got the longer middle, but you can make them very close. It could be, 6 minutes, 8 minutes, and 6 minutes. So they can be very close the way you do it. But the idea is to know it in advance, use a timer if that's helpful to keep track of time, and then afterward to make note of your observations. Try to do this every day. There's not a lot of reading, so you've got more time perhaps to allocate to this. I encourage you to do this earlier in the day if you're finding it challenging to find a time to practice. I really encourage, if you're up for it, to have it where you wake up 20 minutes earlier and just have it where you roll out of bed and you do your practice. You could even have it where the first one is brushing your teeth for 3 minutes, where you're paying attention to the the aroma of the toothpaste and the feel of the toothbrush, and that could be the first part of your sandwich practice. All right. Now, you also have, and I want to keep this simple, so take this really sort of easy, and we'll talk about it when we're together. You may recall that Owen, at the end of class, talked about how for him solitude, there was this realization that you could be away from everybody, but there's all this technology. We could call that the external environment. We could call that external solitude. If there's a whole lot of technology going on, or a whole lot of people chattering, or a whole lot of noise, or a whole lot of stimulus information that you're taking in, it's probably low in solitude, right? You're not that isolated from the output of other people's minds. And if there's not a lot of that going on, then the solitude meter external would be higher. So too, you may remember Sophie talking about how you could have it where the external, stimulation is low, but the internal chatter is high. So we're now teasing these apart. The internal solitude, the external solitude. The flip of that would be the internal stimulation, the external stimulation, because likely the stimulation and solitude would, be opposite each other. And the idea is this, again, keeping it simple. For just four of the things that you identify as part of the beginning or the ending of the sandwich practice, take, sitting with my dog and just being with my dog for 5 minutes. That could be it. You would write, being with my dog for 5 minutes. And then you would think to yourself, okay, if I'm with my dog, this is prospective. You don't do it afterward. It's not an observation. This is a prospective consideration. If I'm with my dog and it's just me and my dog, what would the external solitude be? And you might think to yourself, well, there's a dog and maybe there's some, sounds, but solitude's pretty high. So you would circle sort of high on the external solitude meter. And then you'll consider, okay, so if I'm with my dog and I'm petting my dog, and what do I think my internal solitude would be like? And you might be like, you know what? If I'm just there petting the dog, I might not be having too many rambunctious thoughts. I think that'll be high also, right? Or whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. It's not like we're trying to pick things that are going to be high. You'll probably notice that the things that you've identified already as things that you're interested in for self-care, taking the warm bath, swimming, taking a walk in your neighborhood, whatever it is, they tend to be pretty high on the solitude meter. And they create the opportunity perhaps because if you're immersed in the beauty of the outdoors or being with your pet or swimming, that the internal solitude would be a little bit lower than it might otherwise be. So for 4 of those things that you identify that you'll be doing before or after the middle part of the practice. Just spend a few moments and note where you think it would fall on the internal and external solitude meters and explain a little bit about why. You will email to me by Thursday this and your spiral. This, which is my way of saying these, you can bring to class with you. Alrighty, I hope that that is helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know. And also, please keep it simple. I mean, again, we've talked about this. I got a spiral to do. I've got, every day 20 minutes and then to make my observations. I've got, to write down external, internal. I mean, practically speaking, it's a 20-minute practice where 5 minutes can be being with your dog and 5 minutes can be sitting and planning out your day. And then 10 minutes might be listening to a focused attention or the hurricane practice. And then at some point, once this week, you take one of the events that led to a little bit of a spiral experience and you make note of what the thoughts, feelings, and sensations were. And you also one day endeavor to not interrupt. I mean, it really is, I think, not a tall order, especially if we can integrate them together. And that's part of what we're exploring. All right, I hope that's helpful. Wishing you all a good week. One more thing. I want to just briefly touch on some of the bigger elements of what we explored in class today, because we touched on, I thought, some pretty interesting and complex considerations. First was, know thyself. Be true to yourself. Be good to yourself. That's very important in our class, in the various assignments we're doing and things we're practicing. And there was that collection of attributes that you all began to identify, to be, patient, to be compassionate, to be gentle, to be brave. And so just a reminder, you wrote down one of those, and then you also came up with another one of your own. Maybe take a Post-it or a piece of paper and write them down in bigger letters and put them somewhere so you remember them over the course of this week. What was important, though, I think, for our purposes as a group is to know that, be patient with yourself, be forgiving, be trusting. You're all doing a really terrific job, and I'm enjoying our class conversations, and I'm loving your readings, your writings about the materials and your insights. And so you're all doing really, really well. And this is a journey, and I'm enjoying being on this journey with you. But, to find balance, to know that it's all along a gradient. It's not like one side of the spectrum is the place to be. To the contrary, it's not about being, I can sit for an hour and meditate. It's not about, I can find a pristine, no external stimulus environment. Not only is it not about that as a practical matter, but it's also not about that from a pragmatic matter. As we touched on in class, that's not necessarily the way to show up in the moments that are calling for you to participate in life meaningfully with other people and with the work that you do. So that gradient and finding balance is really an important reminder to be curious about our experience and your experience, and to know that it's about finding a balance point, which will be changing moment by moment by moment, depending upon what's taking place. Okay. Also, we spent a bit of time on the spiral, this idea that something happens and then we resist it, and then there's thoughts and feelings and sensations, and then perhaps an over or an under reaction, and then that our over or under reaction becomes somebody else's event that they resist, and it can go around and around. And it's hopefully for you it's another look at the snow globe. And whereas the snow globe was more general, this is a little bit more specific. That's why filling out the spiral diagram will be helpful. And to sort of understand the nature of the ways in which we can have snow globe moments and spiral moments, and very importantly, what some of the ingredients are to be able to get off the spiral sooner. And as many of you noted in class, it begins with being aware that we're even there in the first place. So one of the insights from that was that we're always having thoughts, feelings, and sensations, and sometimes they're agitating and unpleasant, and sometimes they're not. Life is a series of events, one after the other, after the other, after the other. When we practice mindfulness, like a focused attention practice, and we sit, we're really noticing thoughts, feelings, and sensations. And because we're not, we're sitting with an intention to stay sitting, we're less likely to get up and do something when the thoughts, feelings, sensations tend to be unpleasant. And we commented in class how sometimes we'll sit and then we'll get up and we'll get to the phone or we'll get food or something. And in some ways, it's because we were becoming a little agitated, and just like we're honking on the horn or speeding up, getting in front of somebody and slowing them down, we tend to do that to feel better. One day you may be in court and opposing counsel says something and it's really not a nice thing that they say, and maybe they're lying or misrepresenting, and we can have a spiral moment. And then the question is what we say or do next going to be useful, or is it going to be to feel better? And so we're beginning to zero in on being able to tell the difference, and also to settle our snow globe. If nothing else, a few slower, deeper breaths can help settle our snow globe, can help to slow down the spiral so that we can see a little bit more clearly and maybe get off it a little bit sooner. So these are some of the considerations that we brought to class, brought to the spiral, and something that we'll continue to explore in the weeks to come.